Adana was the kind of girl who spoke more with her eyes than with her mouth. In a household full of noise, gossip, and orders shouted from room to room, her silence was a small rebellion, one that no one cared to notice. She was quiet, yes, but never empty. Inside her, thoughts swirled like river currents under moonlight. She poured them onto paper, each word shaped carefully, each drawing breathing life of its own. Her diary was her world, a worn brown book bound with string, its pages soaked with secrets she dared not speak aloud. Every evening after the house quieted and the last lantern dimmed, Adana would sit by the window, candlelight flickering over her face, and write. Her ink-stained fingers moved with purpose, guided by something deeper than thought. Her diary didn't just hold her emotions. It captured something that reached beyond the ordinary. The words she wrote had a rhythm, a pull, as though someone unseen whispered them into her ear. Sometimes she felt the air around her shift, warm and humming softly, like unseen hands tracing her spine. And when she woke the next morning, small things she'd written had already come true. A sudden rainstorm, a broken jar, a visitor's arrival. Her family called it coincidence. "That girl thinks too much," her mother often said with a sigh, shaking her head. "Books and thoughts don't fill a pot." Her brothers mocked her quietness, mimicking her stillness during meals or teasing her for talking to spirits. But Adana had learned to fold their laughter into silence. It was her armor. She had no need to explain the way she could sense the world breathing, how she could feel the trees murmuring secrets, the ground humming with memory, or the ancestors' presence in the gentle rustle of wind through the raffia roof. At night, when others slept, the whispers grew clearer. They came not as words but as feelings, as soft pulses of warmth behind her ears. Sometimes she would lift her pen without thinking and her hand would move on its own. The next morning she'd find entire passages written in her diary that she couldn't recall composing. The handwriting was hers, but not quite. The strokes firmer, the lines straighter. Once she wrote about a market fire that hadn't yet happened. 2 days later the market burned. Another time she wrote about her father's forgotten debt, and before evening fell the creditor arrived at their door. Her mother began to fear the book. "You should pray more," she muttered one night after finding Adana asleep beside her open diary. "Those who stare too long into shadows forget the sun." Adana said nothing. She simply closed her book and smiled faintly, knowing that her mother saw only ink where she saw connection. The diary became her companion, her mirror, and her voice. In it she wrote about people's hearts as though she could see inside them. She described her brother's secret jealousy, her father's quiet regrets, and her mother's buried sadness. But she also wrote of light, of love, of healing, of balance returning to those who listened to the earth's whispers. She didn't understand why she could write such things, only that it felt right, as if she were remembering truths older than her own life. Still, she hid the diary carefully. She knew if anyone found out how much it revealed, they would never see her the same way again. The world feared what it couldn't explain. But the diary called to her night after night, asking her to listen, to write. And so she did, unaware that her words were weaving something greater than dreams. A prophecy inked in silence, waiting for the moment when truth would no longer hide. Ngozi had always believed that a woman's duty was to keep her family's name clean, spotless like the white cloths she washed every market day. But lately whispers followed her wherever she went. At the riverbank, women drew closer together when she approached. In the market, traders paused mid-sale to watch her pass. And in the evenings when she fetched water, the murmurs rode on the wind, soft, poisonous threads that tangled around her heart. "They say the girl knows things," someone whispered once behind her. "That she writes and it happens." Ngozi pretended not to hear, but her hands trembled as she filled her calabash. She wanted to tell herself it was nonsense, that her daughter was just a strange, quiet child who dreamed too much. But even in her own home, shadows began to move differently. Once, a jug slid from the table and landed upright on the floor without breaking. Another night, she woke from a dream she couldn't remember, only to find Adana already awake, staring into the darkness, her diary open beside her. "What are you doing, child?" Ngozi had asked, her voice tight. "Listening," Adana had whispered. "To what?" "The ones who came before." That answer haunted Ngozi. She began to see her daughter not as the shy girl she had raised but as someone standing between two worlds, one she didn't understand. And understanding was dangerous. People feared what they couldn't name, and fear could burn faster than fire. Soon visitors began to arrive, quietly, hesitantly. A neighbor confessed that her son's fever had broken after Adana had drawn his face in her book. Another woman claimed her missing ring appeared the morning after Adana wrote about something lost finding its way home. Even the chief's wife stopped Ngozi in the market and asked if her daughter could write a blessing for her unborn child. Ngozi's chest tightened with dread. Every word of praise felt like a curse waiting to turn. "You will bring shame to us," she hissed one night as she grabbed Adana's shoulders. "Do you want them to call you witch? Do you want them to burn our home?" Adana only looked at her with calm eyes, the kind that saw beyond anger. "I only write what the ancestors show me," she said softly. Ngozi recoiled as if burned. Ancestors. That word, so sacred and distant, now sounded dangerous on her daughter's tongue. Her husband tried to calm her fears, but he too had begun to sleep uneasily, muttering that the girl's book carried more than ink. So Ngozi made a decision. If this diary was the root of all trouble, it had to go. She waited for the night the moon hid behind clouds, when the world seemed to hold its breath. Adana slept soundly, her diary tucked beneath her mat. Ngozi crept into the room, the smell of smoke from the hearth still clinging to her wrapper. Her fingers shook as she pulled the diary free, clutching it to her chest. The leather felt warm, almost alive. For a moment she hesitated, hearing what sounded like a sigh escaping the pages. But then she saw flashes of her neighbors' judging faces, their whispers, their eyes heavy with accusation. Fear hardened her heart. She whispered a short prayer under her breath, struck a match and watched as the first flames licked the edge of her daughter's secret world. But as the fire began to rise, a gust of wind swept through the hut, cold and sudden, and the flame flickered as if unwilling to consume the words within. The diary didn't burn easily. It hissed, crackled, and glowed faintly like something fighting to stay alive. Ngozi stared, torn between terror and disbelief, realizing too late that some truths were never meant to be silenced. That night the village slept beneath a heavy sky. Clouds gathered without rain, pressing down on the huts like a held breath. Inside their small home, Ngozi sat by the hearth, the flickering flame painting long shadows on the mud walls. The diary lay before her, its cover dark and smooth, the air around it pulsing faintly as though it carried a heartbeat. She had prayed all day for courage, for strength to do what she believed would protect her family. Now, in the silence, her prayers felt like pebbles thrown into a storm. Adana slept in the next room, her breathing soft and even, one hand resting near the place where her diary had been. Ngozi looked toward her, guilt tightening her chest. "Forgive me, my child," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I am saving you from yourself." She threw the diary into the fire. First, nothing happened. The book landed with a dull thud, its spine resting on the burning wood. Then suddenly the flames leaped up, higher than they should have, bright enough to bathe the hut in a golden blue light. Ngozi stumbled back, shielding her face from the heat. The air filled with a strange humming sound, like voices whispering in a language she didn't know. The fire crackled and twisted, its colors shifting, blue, gold, white, until the entire hearth glowed like the heart of a star. Ash swirled in spirals above it, forming shapes that almost looked like faces. Faces that watched her, stern and ancient. Ngozi fell to her knees, trembling. "Please," she whispered, clutching her chest, "I meant no harm." But the fire did not care for her intentions. It roared louder, hungry yet deliberate, consuming the diary page by page. The scent of burning leather filled the air, mingled with something sweet, almost floral, as if the ancestors themselves had entered the room. Then in the middle of the blaze one page lifted free. It didn't burn. The page floated upward, glowing faintly, spinning slowly in the air. The letters upon it shimmered like drops of light, rearranging themselves with every turn. Ngozi reached out, but the heat pushed her hand away. The page drifted across the room, carried by a whisper of wind, and slipped through the doorway into Adana's sleeping space. It landed softly beside her bed, untouched by flame. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the fire died down. The light dimmed, leaving only a faint trace of blue smoke curling toward the thatched roof. The hut fell silent again, but the silence felt different now, deeper, watching. Ngozi stared at the ashes, chest heaving. The diary was gone, reduced to cinders and dust. But she could not shake the feeling that something had survived, something she could not see. In the next room Adana stirred. Her eyes opened slowly as though she had been waiting for this moment. The air around her felt charged, vibrating softly, the scent of smoke threading through her dreams. When she sat up, her gaze fell upon the page on the floor. It glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The words upon it moved like ripples on water, unreadable, alive. She reached out with trembling fingers. As she touched the edge of the page, the letters stilled for a heartbeat, then began to shift again, rearranging themselves into sentences that seemed to write her name over and over. Adana. Her breath caught. The words twisted once more, forming a message that made her blood run cold. What is written in truth cannot be burned. Outside, a wind rose, soft but sure, brushing through the trees as though carrying unseen voices. The ancestors were awake. And Adana knew, as she held that unburned page in her shaking hands, that the story her mother had tried to destroy had only just begun to tell itself. Adana sat in the half-light of dawn, the smoky scent of last night's fire still clinging to the air. The single page lay on her mat, faintly glowing as though it breathed. She reached out again, hesitant yet drawn to it, the way a moth is drawn to a flame that promises both warmth and danger. Her fingers brushed against the surface and it pulsed once, soft, rhythmic, like a living heart. The letters shifted, sliding across the surface in elegant, spiraling movements before settling into words that seemed to rise off the page. She began to read. At first the story seemed strange, distant. It spoke of a young woman named Adana, born beneath a night when the ancestors whispered that the line of women in her blood carried both blessing and curse. But as she read further, the words changed tone, almost as if the voice behind them was watching her, an old, knowing voice that had seen centuries pass. The sentences unfolded in rhythm, like drumbeats echoing across generations. She writes because her mother once silenced a truth too heavy to carry. She dreams because her grandmother's tears still wet the roots of the earth. She listens for the river remembers. Adana's pulse quickened. The page was not telling her story as she knew it. It was telling the story of those before her, the ones whose lives still lived inside her bones. She saw flashes in her mind. Women dressed in white cloth, standing beneath moonlight, hands stained with something red. A secret burial. A cry cut short. And then her mother's face, younger, frightened, turning away from something unseen. The words continued to shift, drawing her deeper. One hid the truth beneath ashes. One carried it in silence. The last will uncover what was burned. Her throat tightened. The ashes. The fire. The diary. Her mother's trembling hands. Adana suddenly understood. The fear in Ngozi's eyes had not been only about gossip or shame. There was something else, something buried beneath years of silence. Each word on the page began to echo faintly in her mind, growing louder with every sentence until they became a rhythm she could feel in her body. A slow, heavy drumbeat that matched her heartbeat. The walls of the hut seemed to hum with it, low and deep, like the sound of the earth remembering something long forgotten. Adana couldn't stop reading. The story was no longer on the page. It was inside her, unfolding in flashes and sensations. She smelled wet soil and smoke, felt the cold touch of river water on her ankles, heard voices whispering her name in languages she didn't know but somehow understood. Then came the line that froze her completely. The mother hides not from her daughter, but from the truth she helped bury. Tears welled in her eyes as the page flickered, its glow dimming, then brightening again like a flame struggling against wind. "What truth?" she whispered aloud. "What did you bury?" The page responded, not with new words but with sound. The faint rhythm of drums grew louder, joined by a low hum, voices of women rising in layered harmony. It was haunting, mournful, beautiful. Adana clutched the page to her chest, feeling its warmth seep into her skin. The glow began to fade. The words rearranged one last time before settling into a final sentence that shimmered like water. "Go to where the river bends. There the buried story waits for its voice." The page went still. The air in the hut felt charged, like lightning waiting to strike. Adana sat frozen, the drumbeat still echoing in her blood. Outside, a wind swept through the trees, carrying whispers that sounded almost like her name. Adana, Adana. And for the first time she understood that the diary hadn't just told stories. It had remembered them. And now, It was her turn to uncover what had been buried in silence and fire. The morning sun slipped through the cracks in the hut, spilling thin lines of gold across Adana's face as she held the page closer, desperate for more answers. The words, once calm and rhythmic, began to swirl again, rearranging themselves into sentences that pulsed with heat and sorrow. Her breath hitched as she read the first line that appeared. A mother once made a promise to life by giving death her other child. Her fingers trembled. The words moved slowly this time, deliberate, heavy, like footsteps treading across a sacred ground. She couldn't look away. When two hearts grew in her womb, the earth demanded balance. One for breath, one for silence. Ngozi chose which would open its eyes to the sun. Adana froze. Two hearts. Her pulse quickened, pounding in her ears. She read on, unable to stop even as the air around her thickened. The priestess of the Crimson Shrine came to her in the season of the floods. The river had spoken. One child carried a shadow too deep, the other a light too pure. To keep one, the other must be offered. And so, beneath the silk of night, the mother chose. The page glowed brighter, the ink shimmering like liquid fire. Adana could almost see it. Her mother, younger, frightened, kneeling before an old woman wrapped in red cloth. The priestess's hands dripping with oil, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. The rhythmic sound of a drum nearby, each beat sealing the fate of the unborn. Ngozi's voice, faint, pleading, echoed through Adana's mind as though the page itself carried her cries. Spare one and I will give the other back to the river. Let my child live. Let her live. A chill ran down Adana's spine. The air in the hut grew cold, the corners darkening with a faint shimmer like mist. She pressed her palm against the page, her heartbeat racing. No, she whispered. No, that can't be. But the story refused to stop. The river accepted the bargain. The twin born first was silent, her cry stolen before breath. But her spirit lingered, unbound, finding refuge in ink and memory. She became the voice between worlds, whispering what the mother tried to bury beneath prayers. Adana's tears fell freely now, blurring the glowing letters. The diary, the one her mother had burned, had not been a simple book. It was a vessel, a bridge. Her lost sister's voice had lived through every word, every line she'd ever written. The realization struck her like lightning. All those nights she'd heard whispers while writing, all those words that seemed to come from nowhere, they weren't from her imagination. They were from her. The spirit of the twin who was sacrificed so she could live. The page quivered softly in her hands and faintly she heard a whisper, not from outside but from within her own mind. The voice was soft, almost tender and achingly familiar. I was never gone, Adana. You wrote what I could not speak. Adana's lips parted, a sob caught in her throat. The page grew dim, the glow fading until it looked like nothing more than old parchment again. But she could still feel her sister's presence, gentle, watchful, lingering in the air. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees as though the earth itself remembered. And in that moment, Adana understood the true cost of her mother's love, and the shadow of the life that had burned just so hers could remain. The days that followed were heavy with unease. Even the air in the village felt changed, stiller, charged with something unseen. Adana tried to go about her chores as before, fetching water, sweeping the yard, tending the small fire each morning, but everywhere she went she felt eyes on her. The whispers that had once been gossip now sounded like warnings. And beneath them all there was another whisper, closer, softer, breathing just behind her ear. At first she thought it was her imagination. The trauma of what she had learned about her mother, the sleepless nights spent replaying every memory of the diary, the haunting image of that glowing page. But then as she spoke to herself one morning, practicing a song she used to hum while weaving, she froze. The song didn't sound right. Her voice came out in two tones, hers and another, softer, echoing her words half a breath behind. It wasn't an echo in the air. It was an echo inside her. She clutched her throat, panic rising. Who's there? She whispered. And from somewhere deep within she heard it, the same voice from the page. You remember me, sister. Adana stumbled back, her breath catching. The clay bowl in her hand shattered against the ground. The sound echoed through the hut and Ngozi appeared from the doorway, her face pale with fear. What happened? Adana could barely speak. Mother, she's here. Ngozi's expression hardened instantly, the old terror flashing back into her eyes. Don't say that, she snapped. Don't bring her name into this house. But she's not gone, Adana said, voice trembling. You said the river took her, but she's... Ngozi covered her ears, shaking her head. Stop. Don't invite her spirit back. She rushed out, muttering prayers under her breath, leaving Adana trembling in the silence that followed. That night the wind began to change. It no longer whispered aimlessly through the trees. It called in two voices. One low and steady, the other high and lilting, like a child's laughter carried through leaves. Adana. When she looked into the mirror her mother had kept since her youth, Adana gasped. Her reflection smiled, but her lips had not moved. For a brief heartbeat, another face flickered beside her own. The same features, the same eyes, but somehow older, sorrowful and luminous. Then it was gone, leaving only her reflection staring back, wide-eyed and trembling. Every night afterward the phenomenon grew stronger. Lamps dimmed when she entered a room. Her voice would split in two when she prayed. Once as she drew water from the river she saw ripples forming words on the surface. I am still here. By the third day the villagers began to talk again. They said the spirit of the unborn twin had returned, no longer content to whisper through a diary. Now she wanted to reclaim her body, her name, her life. Some said Adana was possessed. Others whispered that she was both sisters at once, half living, half dead. Children stopped playing near her home. Elders crossed themselves when she passed. Even her mother began sleeping outside the hut, terrified that the spirit would appear beside her in the dark. But Adana no longer feared the presence. The more the voice spoke, the less it felt threatening. It wasn't demanding nor cruel. It was lonely. They forgot me, it said one night as she lay awake. But you remembered. You always did. Tears filled Adana's eyes as a soft wind brushed her cheek like a touch. What do you want from me? She whispered. There was a pause, then the voice answered, fragile but resolute. Not your life, sister. Only my name. Outside, thunder rumbled though the sky was clear, and the ancient drums of the ancestors began to echo faintly from the forest. The whispers had returned, not to haunt but to remind. And though the village trembled, Adana finally understood that what was coming was not just a haunting. It was a reckoning, one that would not rest until the truth was spoken by both voices as one. Ngozi's hands shook as she backed away from her daughter, her voice trembling like the flame of the single oil lamp flickering in the hut. Adana, she whispered, you do not understand what you are holding. Adana's eyes burned with both sorrow and fury. The page in her hand shimmered faintly, its glow reflecting on her face like moonlight on restless water. Then make me understand, she demanded. Why does the page know my name? Why does it speak like it knows my soul? Ngozi's throat tightened. Her whole life she had buried this secret under years of silence, prayers and fear. She had told herself the whispers were just guilt, that they would fade with time. But seeing that page, alive with the name she'd hoped to forget, cracked open the past she had tried to seal shut. You were never meant to read those words, Ngozi said, her tone breaking. You were never meant to know her. Adana's heart pounded. Her. The lamplight flickered. A gust of wind slipped through the window, circling the room like a sigh. The page's glow deepened, and faint outlines of two intertwined figures began to appear across the parchment. Ngozi sank to her knees. When I carried you, she began, her eyes distant with old pain, I carried 2 heartbeats. But you were weak. The healer said neither of you would live. I begged the gods for help, and the priestess of Aroha answered. She offered me a choice. One child for the life of the other. A life for a life. Adana stared at her mother, unable to speak. Ngozi's voice quivered. I chose you. Silence filled the room like smoke. The wind outside grew louder, whispering faintly in twin voices. Adana. You killed my sister, Adana said, her words trembling but sharp. You traded her. Ngozi shook her head violently. No. I didn't kill her. I begged them to save both of you, but the priestess said balance must be kept. I gave her the charm she asked for and she marked the unborn twin. The night after, the cries stopped, yours and hers, and I thought I had lost you both. But then you breathed again. Adana's tears blurred her vision. And the diary? It was her gift, Ngozi whispered. The priestess gave it to me to record your growth, to bind your soul so your sister's spirit would rest. But I couldn't bring myself to write. I kept it near you when you were a baby, and the words began to appear on their own. I thought it was your imagination when you grew older, but the things you wrote, they came true, Adana finished, her voice distant. Ngozi nodded weakly. Because they were not just your words. She writes through you. The lamp sputtered out, plunging them into darkness. Only the page glowed now, illuminating both faces, mother and daughter, and the faint outline of a third flickering shape hovering between them. The air grew heavy, pressing down on their chests. The ink on the page began to swirl, and a new word started forming beside Adana's name, Adama. The letters pulsed softly, alive as if breathing. Adana's hands trembled. She's here, she whispered. Ngozi bowed her head, tears spilling freely. I thought burning it would end it. I thought the fire would cleanse us. But the glow only grew stronger, spreading across the room, lighting the walls with faint ancestral symbols. Eyes, hands, spirals, all turning slowly toward them. She doesn't want revenge, Adana said, her voice now layered with a faint echo. She wants to be remembered. Ngozi looked up at her daughter and saw both faces at once, Adana's and the ghostly reflection of the twin she had lost. The two souls stood side by side in the same body, bound by blood, memory, and the words of the living ink. Outside, the wind howled through the village, carrying two names, Adana, Adama, as if the ancestors themselves had begun to chant. Ngozi fell to the ground, clutching her chest, whispering prayers that melted into sobs. Forgive me, she wept. Forgive what fear made me do. Adana knelt beside her, her voice soft yet echoing with two tones. The story isn't over, mother. But tonight, the truth is finally written. And the page, pulsing faintly in her hand, folded itself shut, as if sealing one chapter of the past before opening another. The night arrived heavy with tension, the sky swollen with clouds that refused to release rain. Thunder rolled across the village, low and insistent, shaking the walls of Adana's small hut. The air was thick and electric, carrying a scent of ozone that made every hair on her arms stand on end. She sat on the floor, the glowing page clutched to her chest, heart hammering, eyes wide in the flickering firelight. A chill brushed across her neck, and the flames danced unnaturally, twisting into shapes that seemed almost human. Then slowly the air thickened, and from the fire itself a figure emerged. It was delicate and insubstantial, luminous and silver-edged, hovering just above the hearth. The shape of a girl, smaller than Adana but unmistakably connected to her, a reflection twisted yet familiar. The eyes met hers, unblinking, neither angry nor forgiving, but full of an ancient demand. Adana's breath caught. You are real, she whispered. The figure tilted its head as if considering whether she should answer. Then a soft, layered voice rose. Her own voice and another, mingled together like two instruments playing a single haunting melody. I am Adama, it said. I am the one you do not remember, the one your mother tried to hide, the one who lives through what was burned. And I am here to restore balance. Ngozi, trembling beside her daughter, fell silent. Her prayers had failed to protect them, and now the past had stepped fully into the present. You must speak the truth, the spirit continued, moving through the room with an unearthly grace. Every lie, every hidden act, every name you have buried. If the words remain unspoken, your lineage will carry the weight of forgetting every daughter born thereafter. They will vanish from memory as though they never existed. The river will not forgive, the wind will not carry your cries, and the ancestors will turn away. Adana's lips parted, her mind racing. She looked at her mother, whose eyes brimmed with fear and guilt. I will, she said slowly, feeling the weight of generations pressing upon her. I will speak. Ngozi shook her head, desperate. Not here. Not like this. The village, they will. They must hear, Adana said firmly, her voice echoing with the twin tones of Adama's presence. It is time. The spirit's glow intensified, bright enough to make the shadows on the walls tremble. Sparks rose from the fire, swirling around them, illuminating ancestral symbols etched faintly into the walls of the hut. The room seemed to expand, as if the house itself had become a sacred space where the past and present collided. Speak it. Adama's voice thundered, though it carried no anger. It was a command rooted in justice, not vengeance. Every secret your mother tried to bury, every fear she cloaked in silence. Speak it so the daughters may remember, so the ancestors may be appeased, so balance may be restored. Ngozi sobbed, covering her face with trembling hands. I sacrificed. Adana held the page high and the letters shimmered once more. She began to recite aloud, recounting every detail she had learned from the diary, from the whispers, from the visions. She spoke of the bargain, the twin lost, the fear and shame that had silenced her mother for years. With every word, the fire's glow softened, the thunder's rumble subsided, and the wind outside seemed to listen, still and respectful. The spirit's figure hovered over the page, watching as balance began to settle in the room. The glow of the diary dimmed, but its warmth remained. The message had been spoken. The ancestors' eyes rested on them once more, and the lineage, finally, was spared from forgetting. Adana sank to her knees, heart pounding, yet lighter than it had ever been. Ngozi collapsed beside her, trembling with relief. And the twin spirit, her presence now gentle, slowly faded into the flickering embers, leaving only the soft memory of a voice that demanded truth and honored the daughters yet to come. The first hints of dawn touched the sky with a pale orange glow, but the village was still shrouded in shadow and unease. Ngozi stepped out of the hut, her bare feet crunching on the dirt path, heart pounding like a drumbeat in her chest. The villagers had already begun their morning routines, fetching water, tending fires, sweeping the yard, but the air was tense, heavy with the memory of last night's storm, the whispers of the unseen and the rumors of Adana's twin. She clutched her wrapper tightly around her shoulders, not for warmth but for courage. Every step toward the village square felt like crossing a river of fire. Fear twisted in her stomach, a familiar old companion that had ruled her life for decades. But the vision of Adana, the glowing page in her hand, and the gentle, persistent presence of the lost twin had strengthened her resolve. When she reached the square, villagers stopped and stared. Mothers clutched their children, elders squinted against the early light, and young men and women froze mid-task. Whispered conversations faded into silence. Ngozi took a deep breath, and for the first time she lifted her head high, meeting their eyes. "I have something to say," she began, voice trembling yet firm. "I have lived in fear for too long, and I have carried a burden in silence. But the truth cannot be hidden any longer." The villagers murmured nervously. Some looked at each other in disbelief, wondering what dark secret the woman would reveal. Ngozi's gaze shifted to Adana, standing a few paces behind her, holding the diary page that had survived the fire. The page glowed faintly, warm in her hands, as if urging her mother forward. Ngozi's chest heaved as she spoke the words that had haunted her dreams for years. "When I was pregnant with twins, I feared I could not save them both. I went to the priestess of Aroha and made a terrible choice. I gave one child to the river and begged that the other survive. That child is Adana, the daughter you all know." A hush fell over the square. The sun's first rays fell upon the villagers' faces, revealing shock, fear, and a dawning understanding. Ngozi continued, her voice breaking with tears. "I tried to hide the truth from her, from all of you, but in doing so, I allowed fear and shame to take root. I burned her diary, thinking that might protect us, but the words will not be destroyed." Adana stepped forward, holding the glowing page between her hands. The light intensified, golden and pure, casting long shadows across the villagers' astonished faces. The page lifted slowly from her hands, swirling in the air like a living ribbon of fire and sunlight. It wrapped around both mother and daughter, bathing them in warmth and radiant light. Gasps filled the square as the glow seemed to press gently against each villager, touching hearts, clearing the haze of fear and suspicion that had grown over years. The diary's golden light pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then settled as if blessing both the living and the remembered. Ngozi sank to her knees in the center of the square, sobbing openly. "I am sorry," she cried. "Forgive me, Adana. Forgive me, my child. Forgive the years I lived in fear and silence." Adana knelt beside her mother, her hands finding Ngozi's. The page's glow softened, enveloping them both, and she felt a pulse, steady, reassuring, alive. She understood now that forgiveness, like truth, could flow like a river, washing over the past and cleansing it. The villagers, moved by the confession and the miraculous light, stepped closer. Some bowed their heads, others wept quietly, but all understood that a great wrong had been spoken aloud and faced. The story of the lost twin, the mother's fear, and Adana's survival was no longer a secret. And in that golden light, mother and daughter rose together, bound not by guilt or fear, but by honesty, courage, and the unbreakable bond of blood and spirit. The diary page floated gently between them before settling into Adana's hands, its glow now steady, calm, and eternal, a reminder that truth once spoken could heal even the deepest wounds. The morning sun had barely risen, but the air felt different, calm, charged with a gentle energy that seemed to hum beneath the skin. Adana stood at the edge of the river, the surviving page of her diary clasped tightly in her hands. The golden glow from the night before had faded to a steady warmth, and the village beyond the trees was silent, as though holding its breath in reverence. The wind, which had whispered and howled for so many nights, stilled completely. The surface of the river rippled faintly, reflecting the early light, and Adana felt a presence behind her, soft, familiar, patient. A shimmering shape rose slowly from the water, luminous and delicate. The form of a young girl identical to the vision she had seen in the fire, but now more defined, more solid. It was Adama, her lost twin, and yet there was no fear in her presence, no anger or sorrow that demanded revenge. Only completion, only a quiet insistence that their story be whole. Adana stepped closer, her heart pounding. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." The spirit tilted its head, eyes luminous and steady, matching Adana's in perfect harmony. Then slowly, a warm light began to spread from the page in her hand, traveling along her arms, filling her chest and radiating outward. Adama's form drew nearer, and when their bodies finally touched, there was no shock, no pain, only a gentle merging like water joining with water. Adana gasped as she felt the presence of her sister fold into her own, not as possession but as completion. Memories, whispers, and visions she had once felt alone now balanced perfectly, each heartbeat harmonizing with the other. She could sense her twin's spirit, her thoughts, her joy, her longing, and she could carry it all without fear. The river shimmered, reflecting not one face but two, overlapping and smiling as one. Adana raised her hands to her reflection, tracing the twin images, marveling at the sight. The living and the spirit, reunited, whole, and shining with a quiet strength that demanded no recognition, only understanding. The air around her was still yet vibrant, as though the earth itself acknowledged the completion of something long broken. Leaves no longer rustled in ominous whispers but shimmered gently in the soft light, reflecting the harmony of two souls joined in life and spirit. The village beyond remained asleep, unaware of the miracle at the river, yet the change was already woven into the world. Adana could feel it in the grass beneath her feet, in the hum of the air, in the soft pulse of the water. For the first time she felt entirely herself, yet not alone. She turned her gaze to the horizon, the golden light catching her eyes, making them glow faintly. Not with magic alone, but with the knowledge of truth, reconciliation, and love that had survived fire, fear, and centuries of silence. Adana knelt by the riverbank, cupping water in her hands, and looked once more into the reflection. Two faces smiled back at her, one living, one spirit, perfectly balanced. A gentle laugh rose from her throat, soft and pure, carrying with it both joy and release. And for the first time in her life, Adana felt completely whole. Her twin was no longer lost, the diary no longer a vessel of fear, and the wind, finally, carried only harmony. The story that had begun in ashes and whispers had reached its conclusion. A story of reunion, of balance, and of a bond that not even death could sever. The days following the merging of the twins were serene, yet charged with a quiet magic that seemed to hum beneath the soil, wind, and water. Adana returned to her hut by the river, carrying a new blank diary gifted by her surviving page, its cover soft and warm under her fingertips. She hesitated for only a moment before placing it on the wooden table, sunlight spilling across its empty pages, inviting the story to begin anew. As she lifted her pen, she felt the gentle presence of Adama beside her, no longer a ghost hovering, but a companion of thought and spirit woven into her own being. Adana breathed deeply and began to write. At first the words came slowly, carefully, each sentence deliberate. Then, as she settled into the rhythm of her pen gliding across the paper, the diary began to respond. Words appeared almost of their own volition, luminous and soft, forming sentences filled with honesty, forgiveness, and quiet wisdom. The first line shimmered on the page. Truth speaks even when silence is chosen, and forgiveness blooms where fear once grew. Adana smiled faintly, sensing the harmony between herself and her twin. Each page seemed to pulse with life as though it had a heartbeat of its own. She realized the diary had transformed. It was no longer merely a vessel for visions or a witness to her family's secrets. It had become a mirror of the village itself. As the morning deepened, she noticed subtle changes. A villager walking past her window whispered nervously to a neighbor, and the diary's pages rustled faintly, like a gentle breeze whispering across the table. Adana looked down and saw a new sentence appear. What is hidden cannot remain so when hearts tremble in shame. Word of the diary's rebirth spread quietly through the village. People began to behave differently, if only slightly. Small acts of honesty, small confessions whispered in the wind. Those who tried to hide their faults or shameful deeds would feel the rustle of its pages, a soft but undeniable reminder that the diary witnessed all. It did not punish nor scold, but it never let a secret remain buried. Adana wrote of reconciliation between families, of apologies spoken and forgiven, of laughter returning where tension once hung heavy. She wove tales of justice, kindness, and the lessons she and her sister had learned. Every page held dual voices now, hers and Adana's, interlacing truth and spirit, the living and the remembered. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adana paused to look around the village. She could feel the subtle shift in energy, a sense of vigilance, humility, and reverence spreading among the people. She realized that the diary had become not just her personal refuge, but a guardian of integrity. Whenever deception, pride, or fear threatened to take root, the pages would stir, gently nudging the guilty toward the light of acknowledgement. She smiled, pen poised above the next blank page. The diary no longer simply recorded life. It guided it. It had become a sacred instrument, a reminder that no lie, no shame, no secret could hide forever. Adana leaned back, letting the evening breeze brush across her face. The river reflected the soft glow of the diary beside her, as if affirming its new purpose. The twins' presence whispered lightly in her ear, a voice both hers and not hers, calm and certain. We are whole. We are witness. We are truth. And so each day Adana wrote, the diary filling with light and wisdom. Its pages became the conscience of the village, a quiet yet unyielding force that ensured balance, forgiveness, and honesty endured. Wherever someone faltered in deceit or pride, the diary's gentle rustle reminded them that every secret would eventually see the light, and that truth, when nurtured, always prevailed.